A man walks along a dusty limestone ridge just outside Jerusalem. The morning air is still sharp. Preachers often use this text to deliver a heavy-handed warning. They tell you that you had better bear fruit for God. You had better perform. They will smell the roasting meat. The temple guards will still stand at their posts. The high priest will still wear his ornate robes. The entire machine will keep grinding forward. The leaves in the courtyard are still green, but the roots are dead. Jesus has severed the entire religious economy from its source. The covenant has been broken by the tenants, and the landlord has arrived to shut down the operation. A system can survive for a short time after its roots are cut. It can run on momentum. It can run on tradition. It can put on a massive, impressive spectacle, but it cannot produce life. It cannot feed a hungry world. The disciples stare at the dead wood in silence. They are witnessing the terrifying difference between activity and vitality, between looking alive and actually bearing fruit. The temple had perfected the art of the canopy, but the canopy is exactly where the danger hides. The fig tree is unique among fruit-bearing plants in the ancient Near East. For most trees, the leaves arrive first, and the fruit slowly follows months later. But the Palestinian fig tree operates on a completely different biological clock. The early, edible fruit buds actually appear before or right alongside the broad green leaves in the early spring. When you see a massive canopy of fig leaves rustling in the wind, it is broadcasting a specific biological promise, or God will curse you and wither your life down to the roots. But both of those readings completely miss what is actually happening on the dirt road. The leaves are nature's billboard. They are announcing to anyone walking on the dirt road that nourishment is already hiding beneath the branches. To have leaves without fruit is not a delay in the agricultural cycle. It is an active deception. The leaves are not the problem. The false advertisement is the problem. The temple is not an innocent victim of a harsh season. It is a factory of phantom foliage. When a religious system becomes obsessed with its own preservation, it stops producing fruit and starts manufacturing leaves. It builds magnificent structures out of cold white marble. It organizes massive, noisy gatherings that smell of expensive incense, polished wood, and success. It creates a flurry of exhausting, endless motion. But motion is not the same thing as movement. Leaves are incredibly easy to grow. They only require superficial resources, a little bit of shallow water, a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of outward coordination. You can maintain a massive, leafy religious empire for decades, purely on the momentum of human effort, charismatic leadership, and financial machinery. You can keep the gates swinging and the choirs singing long after the presence of God has left the building. Fruit is entirely different. Fruit requires a deep, subterranean connection to a living source. It requires the slow, invisible, agonizing work of the roots, pushing blindly through hard dirt and rock to Jerusalem. Jesus is not losing his temper. He is executing a brilliant, calculated piece of prophetic street theater. The cursing of the fig tree is not to find living water. The fruit of the Spirit, love that sacrifices, joy that anchors, peace that defies circumstances, patience that endures the dark, cannot be faked by putting on a better show. You cannot manufacture the character of Christ through better religious programming. The religious elite in Jerusalem had become master arborists of a phantom canopy. They knew a fig tree in the Middle East operates on a very specific biological clock. The fruit buds appear first, often before the winter is entirely over, hardening on the bare wood in the cold air. The leaves come later, unrolling as the weather warms, acting as a vibrant green billboard that the tree has already done its hidden work. By the time a tree is fully covered in broad, thick leaves, it is biologically broadcasting a guarantee. It is telling anything that walks past that it is carrying food. The leaves are a promise. This is why the presence of the foliage, without the presence of the fig, is not just an agricultural oddity. It is a biological lie. The tree is advertising a nourishment it does not actually possess, drawing in the hungry only to hand them empty shade. When you map this botanical reality onto the religious structure of the first century, The precision of Jesus' anger becomes devastatingly clear. A story about agriculture. It is a death sentence for a religious system. To feel the actual weight of what happens under those leaves, you have. The temple system was a masterclass in manufacturing leaves. It had the massive limestone architecture, the precise chanting of the Levitical choirs, the heavy scent of burning frankincense, and the endless rivers of silver flowing across the courtyard tables. It possessed every single metric of religious success that a human eye could measure. It looked like the most vibrant, thriving spiritual organism on the planet. But when the God of Israel actually pushed his hands into the machinery to find justice for the oppressed, mercy for the broken, and faithful prayer for the nations, he grasped nothing but cold stone. The withering of the tree is not a penalty for a poor harvest. It is the dismantling of a false advertisement. Hypocrisy, in the biblical sense, is not simply a person struggling with sin while trying to do the right thing. Hypocrisy is a theatrical production. The Greek word hypokrites literally refers to an actor walking onto a stage wearing an oversized mask to project a character they do not actually embody. The temple was wearing the mask of God's presence while operating the mechanics of a corporate monopoly. It was a stage play built over a spiritual graveyard. God does not curse weakness. He does not curse the slow, struggling growth of a broken person. He curses the elaborate, expertly choreographed pretense that weaponizes his name to build an empire of empty leaves. To let go of the Sunday school version of a frustrated carpenter, you have to realize that Jesus is not offering a moralistic lesson about personal productivity. Jesus is exposing the most dangerous phantom in the spiritual world. The illusion that religious activity is the exact same thing as spiritual vitality. A system can learn to mimic the posture of life while being entirely dead at the core. It can substitute the loud, impressive rustle of leaves for the quiet, agonizing work of actually bearing fruit. It can build a canopy so thick that no one notices the roots are rotting away in the dark. The tragedy of the phantom foliage is that it does not just fail God. It starves the people who come looking for him. A hungry world walks up to the impressive structures we build, desperate for an encounter with the divine, and they leave with nothing but the taste of dust and the echo of their own footsteps. But the human heart has always been addicted to the canopy, and the temptation to manufacture leaves did not end when the Romans finally burned that temple to the ground. You do not have to be a first-century priest to manufacture leaves. You only have to be human. If you are in a season where your faith feels like a heavy, exhausting performance, you need to look at what you are actually carrying. He is diagnosing something massive. He is exposing a structure that has mastered the art of looking spectacularly alive while being entirely hollow on the inside. We are terrified of being found empty. We are terrified that if people walk up to us and inspect our branches, they will find nothing but barren wood. So we build a canopy. You can build a canopy out of a perfectly curated social media feed, glowing bright and spiritual in the dark of your bedroom. You can build it out of endless volunteer hours, stacking your calendar so full that no one can accuse you of not caring. You can build it out of having all the right theological answers, weaponizing your intellect so no one sees the quiet terror vibrating in your chest. You build it out of the physical weight in your jaw when you force a smile through a Sunday morning handshake, while quietly drowning on the inside. You spend all your energy trying to look brilliantly alive for the crowd. But deep down, you can feel the brittleness in your own bones. You know that one strong wind, one real crisis, one shattering midnight phone call will strip the branches bare and reveal exactly how dry the trunk has become. This exhaustion is not a crisis of faith. It is the crushing weight of maintaining phantom foliage. The tragedy of the fig tree is that it spent all its resources trying to look alive, instead of drawing actual life from the ground. When you live under the constant pressure to produce, you eventually stop drinking from the source. You spend your mornings watering the leaves instead of tending the roots. But the key to unlocking this moment is not actually found in the branches of the tree itself. The key is hidden in how the author arranged. You pour your life into the visible, the loud, the measurable, but Jesus does not want your leaves. He is not asking for a pristine, heavily managed public relations campaign about how well you are doing. He knows exactly what winter does to a branch. He knows exactly what drought does to a root. He is not fooled by the rustle of the canopy, and he is not impressed by the size of the shadow it casts. The cursing of the fig tree is not a threat. It is a rescue mission. Jesus is systematically destroying the illusion that performance can save you. He is breaking down the crushing demand to always look perfectly put together. He is taking an axe to the root of religious anxiety. He is declaring that a broken, honest, barren branch, crying out for water, is infinitely more beautiful to God than a massive, leafy spectacle built on a lie. He is not looking for a performance. He is looking for presence. But if we strip away the leaves, what are we actually left with? When Peter stood on that dirt road, looking at those dead roots, Jesus did not just leave him staring at the wood. He pointed past the tree, past the massive marble walls of Jerusalem, and he gave his disciples a completely new definition of power, the ink on the page. Because in the first century, a writer like Mark did not stitch his scenes together by accident. He built them with deliberate. Peter stands on the dirt road. He stares at the dead wood. The black roots twist out of the dry earth. The morning wind rattles the brittle branches. Jesus looks at the 12 men surrounding him. He gives them a single command: have faith in God. Then he points. He tells them that if anyone says to this mountain, "Be taken up and thrown into the sea," it will obey. Most people abstract this text. They turn it into a motivational poster. They think the mountain means a financial crisis. They think the mountain means a tough diagnosis. They think it means a difficult obstacle in your career. But Jesus is not speaking in metaphors. He is pointing his physical hand. Look at where his feet are planted. He is standing on the Mount of Olives. The Kidron Valley drops off steeply right below him, and rising on the other side is the Temple Mount. It is a literal, physical mountain of white limestone. The morning sun hits the gold plates on the roof. The glare burns their eyes. The smell of the morning sacrifice rises thick and heavy into the sky. It is the undisputed center of their universe. It is the ultimate canopy of leaves. Jesus points at the dead tree. Then he points at the gleaming temple. This is not a seminar on positive thinking, overlapping architecture. And the detail that changes how you read this entire narrative is exactly what happens the moment Jesus walks away from the leaves. It is a declaration of divine eviction. He is telling these fishermen that the center of their world is about to collapse. The massive religious machine is finished. The thick veil will tear in half. The heavy stones will crack. A Roman legion will march into the holy courtyard. Fire will consume the expensive altars. The entire mountain of religious performance will be cast into the abyss of history. Jesus is telling Peter not to trust the building. He is telling John not to trust the system. He is telling them that access to the creator of the universe will no longer require a toll booth. It will not require a flawless pigeon. It will not require an approved silver shekel. It will not require a high priest's permission. The presence of God is no longer contained behind heavy brass doors. The presence of God is moving into the chests of broken, believing people. Jesus is dismantling the theater so they can finally stand in the truth. The old system is withered from the roots. The canopy of leaves is already dead. But the death of one tree is never the end of the story. The mountain is crashing down. The ground is being cleared. And what God is about to plant in the empty dirt will not need leaves to prove it is alive. When a first-century audience hears the Gospel of Mark read aloud, they do not have chapter breaks. A man walks up to a leafy tree and finds a canopy built on a lie. He steps into a crowded courtyard and flips the tables of a religious economy. A prophet writes of empty branches, and centuries later the judgment arrives in the flesh. The roots dry up overnight and a bankrupt system is cut off from its source. The temple keeps burning its incense and does not realize its own foundation is already dead. A group of fishermen stare at brittle wood and learn that God despises a false performance. A hand points toward a mountain of white limestone, and the presence of God leaves the building to live inside of his people. One thread, one story, but maybe the part that stays with me most is the roots, not the massive canopy. not the clash of silver shekels on the stone tables. The black, brittle roots twisting out of the dry earth on the morning after. Because roots do their work in the dark, they are unglamorous. They are entirely invisible to the passing crowd, but they are the exact place where survival is decided. If you are in a season where the sun just barely breaking over the crest of the Mount of Olives, his sandals crunch against the loose gravel of the road, he is hungry. They do not have study Bibles with crisp white pages and neat little subheadings telling them what a passage means, are exhausted from holding up a heavy, magnificent canopy. You have permission to stop watering the leaves. The God of the universe is not asking you for a flawless performance. He is not inspecting your branches for how well you hide your pain behind a smile. He is asking for your honest, broken, unmasked presence. If this opened something in you, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from religious performance. And please pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who sees past the leaves meet you in the quiet dirt and grow something that never has to fake being alive. They hear a continuous, rhythmic narrative hitting the air, and they are trained to listen for patterns. Scholars call the pattern in this chapter an intercalation. You can call it a Markan sandwich. Mark loves this structural technique. He starts a story. He hits pause. He drops you into an entirely different location. He brings you back to finish the first story. He wraps one narrative entirely around another. When a woman bleeds for 12 years, Mark wraps her desperate healing inside the tragic death of a 12-year-old girl. When Jesus stands on trial before the high priest, Mark wraps his bold confession inside the shivering cowardice of Peter out in the courtyard. He links them. He fuses them. You cannot understand the inner story without the outer story. And you cannot understand the outer story without the inner one. This is not clumsy editing. It is ancient literary neon. Look at the exact sequence of events in chapter 11. Jesus sees a fig tree. He walks up to it. He finds no fruit. He curses the branches. That is part 1. But Mark does not immediately tell you what happens to the wood. He cuts the camera. He leaves the tree standing on the side of the road. Up ahead, standing alone near the path, is a solitary fig tree. It is magnificent to look at. Heavy with broad, green leaves rustling in the wind, and he drags you down the mountain. He pushes you through the heavy, iron-studded gates of Jerusalem. He drops you straight into the courtyard of the central temple for the most violent, disruptive public act of Jesus' entire ministry. That is part 2, the meat of the sandwich. Only after the dust settles in Jerusalem, only after the priests begin plotting a murder, does Mark cut back to the tree. It is the next morning. The leaves are dead. The roots are brittle. The tree is destroyed from the ground up. That is part 3. Mark is not telling you 2 different stories. He is telling you one story from 2 angles. The outer edges interpret the center. The tree is the temple. The temple is the tree. What happens to the leaves explains what happens to the priests. What happens to the roots explains what happens to the entire religious system. The cursing of the fig tree is a physical, living parable meant to prepare your eyes for what Jesus is about to do inside the city walls. He is not acting out of hunger. He is acting out of prophecy. But to understand the true weight of that prophecy, you have to step off the dusty road. You have to walk through the gates of the temple courtyard. It signals life. It promises nourishment. He walks up to it, pushes his hands deep into the thick foliage, and finds nothing but wood and empty shadows. And you have to smell the smoke and hear the chaos when the God of Israel inspects his own house. Jesus steps into the massive court of the Gentiles. The noise hits him like a physical wall. The bleating of thousands of sacrificial sheep echoes off the towering colonnades. The metallic clatter of Tyrian shekels hits the heavy wooden tables. Men shout over the din, negotiating the price of unblemished doves, arguing over exchange rates in half a dozen different dialects. The air is thick, choking with the smell of roasting meat, animal sweat, and expensive incense burning on the altars. This is not a place of quiet prayer. It is a hyper-efficient religious economy. Pilgrims have traveled hundreds of miles for the Passover festival. When they arrive, they cannot bring their own Roman or Greek coins to pay the mandatory temple tax. The law forbids coins stamped with the face of Caesar or pagan deities. So they must exchange their currency for approved temple shekels at steep, exploitative exchange rates. They cannot risk their own sheep getting injured or disqualified on the long journey. So they must buy pre-inspected sacrifices directly from the temple merchants at vastly inflated prices. The religious elite have turned access to God into a toll booth. He does not just sigh and keep walking. He speaks a single, terrifying sentence of destruction over it. May no one ever eat fruit from you again. Jesus does not walk into this space and offer a polite theological critique of their business practices. He begins to dismantle it. He grabs the heavy tables of the money changers and flips them over, sending cascades of silver crashing across the stone pavement. He drives out the people selling doves. He physically blocks anyone from carrying merchandise through the sacred courtyard. He single-handedly shuts down the operational engine of the temple. When you read this in most English translations, a bold subheading usually tells you, Jesus cleanses the temple. But if you look closer at what he actually does, that title falls terribly short. He is not cleansing the temple so it can go back to normal business tomorrow. He is stopping the temple from functioning altogether. He stands in the middle of the wreckage and quotes two prophets as the silver rolls across the floor. He quotes Isaiah, declaring the house was meant to be a place of prayer for all nations. And he quotes Jeremiah, accusing the priests of turning it into a den of robbers, a safe house where thieves retreat after they have already committed their crimes. This is the inner core of Mark's sandwich. Herod spent decades covering this temple in white marble and gold plates. From a distance, it looks like the spiritual center of the universe. His disciples hear it. You have probably heard this story. It is easily one of the most baffling, uncomfortable moments in the entire New Testament. It is bustling with religious activity, teeming with sacrifices, packed with ceremonies. It is a flurry of constant, visible devotion. It looks brilliantly alive. It looks exactly like a tree covered in magnificent green leaves. But Jesus pushes his hands into the machinery of it all, and he finds exactly what he found out on the dirt road: nothing but wood and empty shadows. The disciples watch him tear down the religious economy of Jerusalem, but they still do not understand why he used a plant to do it. To understand that, you have to realize that the prophets Jesus was quoting in the courtyard had already written this exact script hundreds of years earlier. Mark inserts a detail into the text that has troubled readers for 2,000 years. He writes a tiny, bizarre excuse for the tree in chapter 11, verse 13. He notes that Jesus found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. If you read this as a farming report, it makes Jesus look completely unreasonable. Demanding fruit from a plant in the wrong month feels petty, erratic, and deeply undivine. But Mark is not writing a farming report. He is pointing a giant, flashing arrow at the ink of the Hebrew Scriptures. The word Mark uses for season in this verse is the Greek kairos. Most people read Mark chapter 11 and assume they are looking at a rare moment of divine impatience, a hangry Jesus lashing out at an innocent plant. It does not just mean chronological time or the passing of months on a calendar. That word is chronos. Kairos means the appointed time, the critical epoch, the supreme moment of divine inspection. When you pair the image of a barren fig tree with a kairos moment of judgment, every single first-century Jewish mind immediately unrolls the heavy parchment of the prophets. They hear Hosea, they hear Micah, they hear Jeremiah. If realizing that these ancient linguistic threads change everything about the story, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we dig past the English translations to find the truth hiding in plain sight. So Jeremiah stands in the same city centuries earlier. In Jeremiah chapter 8, God comes to inspect Israel. specifically the religious elite in Jerusalem. And the verdict that echoes off the stone walls is devastating. "When I would gather them," declares the Lord, "there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree, even the leaves are withered." The prophets had already established the metaphor. Israel is the fig tree, the temple is the canopy, the religious rituals are the rustling green leaves. For centuries, the prophets warned that when the God of Israel finally came down, because he missed breakfast. Skeptics point to this exact passage and argue that Jesus was erratic, unreasonable, and prone to outbursts. After all, Mark explicitly writes to search the branches for the fruit of justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He would find an empty facade. He would find a massive, leafy spectacle masking a barren core. The note Mark leaves about the season is not an apology for the tree. It is a death sentence for the temple. Jesus is not acting out a tantrum. He is acting out Jeremiah. He is forcing the religious leaders to look at a living, physical embodiment of their own spiritual bankruptcy. The Kairos, the long-awaited hour of their visitation, had finally arrived in the flesh. And despite the noise, the smoke, and the silver, crashing across the temple floor, they had absolutely nothing to offer him. The ancient script was playing out in real time. But the most terrifying part of this prophetic theater was not what happened during the heat of the day. It was what Peter noticed in the cold light of the following morning. The sun breaks over the Mount of Olives. The morning air is cold. The dust kicks up around their leather sandals. Jesus and the 12 walk the exact same path as the day before. They are heading back into the city, back into the tension. An editorial note right in the text: "It was not even the season for figs. Why curse a tree for acting like a tree?" They pass a familiar spot on the dirt road. Peter stops. He points. He remembers. The magnificent fig tree is destroyed. The broad green leaves are blackened. The branches are brittle. The bark is entirely stripped of moisture. It is completely, violently dead. And Mark includes a tiny anatomical detail that carries the weight of the entire chapter. He writes that the tree was withered from the roots. Trees do not naturally die this way overnight. Drought takes the leaves first. Disease attacks the outer branches. A slow decay moves from the outside in, but this execution happened from the ground up. The subterranean foundation of the tree was instantly annihilated. This is not an agricultural phenomenon. It is a theological verdict. When Peter stares at those black, brittle roots, he is looking at the spiritual reality of the temple they are about to re-enter. The roots are the foundation. The roots draw the water. The roots anchor the life. When the roots are cursed, the canopy is already a ghost. It just does not know it yet. The system in Jerusalem still looks alive. The priests are still burning expensive incense. The silver is still clashing on the stone tables. The sacrifices are still bleeding on the altar. The heavy brass gates are still swinging open for thousands of pilgrims. They will walk back into the city today. They will hear the choir singing,